The 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, ratified on December 6, 1865, is the document that set black people free. It set us on a course of liberation, took the chains off of us, supposedly. Have you ever read the 13th Amendment? No. Have you really read the 13th Amendment? Shall we? Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The 13th Amendment never made slavery unconstitutional. It merely set conditions on how slavery, coupled with peonage, could remain constitutional.
Well, it's early in the morning, but when I ride, Lordy Mama. Well, it's early in the morning, but when I ride, well, it's early in the morning, baby, when I ride, baby.
After the Civil War in America, the South was left in shambles. The war strategies of the North did exactly what it was designed to do: destabilize the Southern economic infrastructure and disrupt the normal social structure of whites being in direct control of black enslaved labor. So enters a system whereby persons under the jurisdiction of a state can be brought to slave status using a loophole in the 13th Amendment via criminalization. Basically, if you are convicted of a crime, your punishment can be slavery. Oh, but not just that good old-fashioned American chattel slavery. Out with the old and with the new. This was slavery with a twist. Slavery rental. Convict leasing.
Mr. President, I have a brother about 14 years old. A man hired him from me and I heard of him no more. He went and sold him to McGree and they's been working him in prison for 12 months. I asked him to let me have him, but he won't let him go.
You can't name where I ain't been down.
Under slavery, most black crime was punished by slaveholders, leaving the courts to discipline whites. Now, only about 10% of those arrested were white.
Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that white people are not committing crimes in the South? We know that's not true.
Southern states had a history of placing prisoners with industries that would bear the cost of guarding and housing them in exchange for their labor. Now states also began to charge fees, renting prisoners to companies by the month. The highest rates were for the strongest workers and longest sentences.
This means that states had incentives to arrest and convict as many black males and females as they could round up, sentencing them to be slaves for private companies, plantations, and directly for the state.
It took time for the state to realize that prisoners, believe it or not, could be a source of profit. Once that revenue starts coming in, they're pleasantly surprised. This is new revenue we never had before.
The state of Alabama earned $14,000 in its first year of convict leasing, 1874. By 1890, revenue was $164,000, roughly $4.1 million today.
And if you thought that pre-13th Amendment slavery was bad, convict leasing was worse.
All these years of how we suffered, we have looked death in the face, worked hungry, thirsty, half-clothed, and sore. We would leave the cells around 3 o'clock a.m. and returned at 8 o'clock p.m., going the distance of 3 miles through rain or snow.
To describe the conditions in a coal mine at this time is to say that they're primitive is you can't even imagine it.
This is a place where for weeks or months at a time, men might never see daylight. The mine was often filled with standing water around their ankles and their feet. They had to drink from that water. Disease ran rampant through these mines.
They were incredibly dangerous places to work, being subjected to violent explosions, poisonous gases that were released as coal fell from the walls. In addition to the falling coal itself,
Whippings, keeping people chained up, brutal kinds of physical torture, and mental abuse are the norm. A lot of the things that kept people in control under slavery are amplified under this convict system.
Someone working these kinds of forced laborers would push them to the very limits of human endurance.
Because the white lessee was not held responsible for the killing of a laboring prisoner. But even more important than knowing the history of convict leasing is understanding the tactics used to create the continuation of slavery. Here's a short list of what was made criminal for persons of color under the statutes in the great state of South Carolina. A colored man leaving his wife. A colored woman leaving her husband. A person of color pursuing or practicing the trade of artisan, mechanic, or shopkeeper, or any other trade or business for his own benefit. A person of color doing business on equal terms with a white person. A person of color working for a white person and deemed by the white employer to not have enough skills and experience for the position. A black person being unemployed. The statute reads that vagrancy and idleness are public grievances and must be punished as crimes. Please note that South Carolina was not the only state with black codes. In the southern states in general, things such as spitting, drinking alcohol in public, being drunk in public, loitering, could result in the African Americans being enslaved for vagrancy. Instead of black labor going to the rebuilding of our civilization, it was recaptured by way of new laws and policies and used to undergird the growth of their economy. With the help of their judicial system, all of these states were direct practitioners and beneficiaries of this new slave system. And the northern states were not innocent in this affair. Not only did they have black inmates laboring as slaves, but the North's financial institutions backed the enslaving industrialists and plantations in the South. In essence, convict leasing, along with peonage or debt slavery, served as the post-13th Amendment guide for enslaving African Americans. And this remained the case with the quiet complicity of the federal government until after December 12, 1941, when Circular 3591 was issued. Circular 3591 was a document issued under the order of President Franklin D. Roosevelt to give the okay to start prosecuting cases of involuntary servitude of black people in America. But you always have to ask the question, why? Why, after almost 80 years of turning a blind eye, was the federal government all of a sudden so eager to serve justice for black folks? I'll tell you this, it was not out of the warm humanity spot in their heart that they shared with the black population to end slavery. It was once again a war tactic, a strategy, pure optical illusion, because having slavery practiced on the blacks in the U.S. was a bad image for the propaganda that was needed by the U.S. when entering World War II. The same way that some people live in clutter, but they dust off real quick and shove stuff in the closet before everybody comes over. Yeah, see, we really are democratic. Let's not forget, they also needed blacks to join the military.
My prepared text today was to have been, "Make thy name be remembered in all generations." But I think I'm going to depart from my prepared sermon. While I was listening to the sergeant's solo, I kept looking up at our service flag. I was thinking of the men in service.
And if you figure that you were safe because Circular 3591 was written in 1941 and that is in the past, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, over 1/3 of sentenced prisoners under the state and federal jurisdiction are black. Not black and Hispanic. Just blacks comprise over 1/3 of the prison populations here in America. Yet, we only make up 1/6 of the general population. The NAACP reported in 2009 that around 14 million whites reported using illegal drugs, compared to 2.6 million African Americans. Yet, despite this 5-to-1 ratio of white self-reported users to black counterparts, police jailed 10 times more African Americans than white drug offenders. And 59% of those in state prisons for drug offenses, showing clear bias in the arrest process and the incarceration process. African Americans were reported to serve as much time in prison for drug-related non-violent offenses as whites for violent offenses. And yes, if you have loved ones locked away in jail cells today, chances are you are still making your favorite industrialists rich. Filthy rich. Here are just a few companies who have been reported to utilize prison labor manufactured goods, services, or who have otherwise profited from their financial involvement in the prison industrial complex. The 13th Amendment did not make slavery unconstitutional. It merely created an optical illusion. But let's get it straight. It did not create an optical illusion for this European government that created the system to run exactly as it does. It did not create an optical illusion in those who carry out the disenfranchisement: judges, police, prosecutors. And it did not create an optical illusion in the many companies who benefit directly and indirectly from this enslavement. Who it did create an optical illusion for is the millions of us who feel like slavery and racism is a thing of the past, while yet having more enslaved today than we did at the peak of chattel slavery. But we are just scratching the surface on removing our optical illusions, starting today with the 13th Amendment and how it did not make slavery unconstitutional. It just merely restructured slavery.
We have 25% of the world's prison population, 5% of the world's population. So prisoners under the 13th Amendment essentially work as in a form of neo-slavery for about $1.30 a day.
The Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, is snatching up public employees' jobs, and they're also hurting small businesses. And the way that they're doing that is they are transferring jobs over to prison laborers. This is literally modern version of slave labor.